This week on Inside Olympia, in the wake of the deadly Longview tank disaster, what is Washington's Department of Labor and Industries doing to keep workplaces safe? Plus, how is the agency managing claims and costs? And what are its modernization plans after a massive IT upgrade was halted? We'll cover that and much more when L&I Director Joel Sachs joins us for the full hour.
From the TVW studio, it's Inside Olympia with host Austin Jenkins.
Welcome to Inside Olympia. Washington's Department of Labor and Industries has a broad portfolio focused on keeping the state's 3+ million workers safe. The agency is charged with inspecting job sites and enforcing safety rules. It manages the state's workers' compensation fund for workers who are injured on the job. It also enforces laws related to wages and work conditions and enforces child labor laws. It even issues operating permits for amusement rides. The agency has been in the news a lot in recent weeks following the deadly tank implosion and collapse in Longview that killed 11 workers, making it the deadliest workplace accident in Washington in modern memory. Joining me now, and for the full hour this week to talk about the work of the Department of Labor and Industries, is its longtime director, Joel Sachs. Welcome back to the program.
It's great to be here, Austin. Thank you.
Let me just offer a little bit more context and background for the conversation ahead. Much of this conversation will focus on the operations of L&I, which you might think of as a workplace safety enforcement agency and an insurance agency all in one. It is easy to lose sight of the life and death nature of this work. For context, at the agency's annual worker memorial back in April, 115 workers were memorialized, including 89 who died in 2025. They included 49 who died from exposure to toxic chemicals at work. 13 of them were firefighters, and another dozen or more worked at the Hanford nuclear site. There was a river guide who died when his raft flipped, and workers who were killed in car crashes, falls, from blunt trauma, and who were crushed to death. At each year's ceremony, the names of workers who died are read out loud, and a bell is rung for each one. I wanted to give that context because this gets very wonky very quickly, but at the core of it is the universe of workers out there, some of whom are in very dangerous jobs, and that's been brought home in really devastating fashion in recent weeks because of what happened in Longview. Let's start there, just with your response to what, as I just said, appears to be the deadliest workplace incident in at least modern history in this state.
It's tragic, Austin. My heart, I know everyone in the department's heart goes out to the community, to the workers, to the families. If you can imagine, it's a relatively small community down in Longview, and everyone knows somebody. I've been down there a few times and just can feel the pain of the community.
It's a tight-knit Milltown.
Absolutely. And it's been so impressive also seeing how they've come together as a community, rallying together, supporting each other. Really, tragedy like this sometimes brings out the best, and it's great to see the community come together, but still we all mourn together for the tragic loss of life.
Can you explain what L&I's role is? And I also understand that there's a federal entity that investigates, I guess, specifically chemical accidents or incidents, but who does what in the aftermath of a tragedy like this?
So when something like this occurs, on our end, we have two key responsibilities. The first is the investigative side of the house, where we will go in, assess what happened, why did it happen, who's accountable, were there violations of safety and health rules, and are there things that we can learn to ensure something like this never happens again. Our second role is, as the workers' compensation provider, to be there for the families, to be able to provide financial support, both for those who are hurt in the accident, as well as those who perished, and to be there for their families as they go through these incredibly challenging times. So we've had folks from both teams on the ground from day one.
There is, for survivors, there are survivor benefits that accrue, if I'm not mistaken.
There are. And it's both, there's an immediate payment, and then there's some money that's available to cover funeral costs, and then for dependents and for spouses or domestic partners, there's the possibility of being able to get a monthly benefit that could be in the thousands of dollars.
And then how does it work if there are state investigators from your agency there, and then federal investigators, and deciding who's doing what and kind of what those roles look like?
So we both have important roles. They're similar roles, but not exactly the same. So we're there, and our focus is really looking at what happened through that lens of workplace safety, through the lens of looking at were there workplace rules that are on the books that were violated. We have 6 months to go in, do our investigation, and then issue any potential monetary penalties or findings. On the federal side, there's the Chemical Safety Board. And as you mentioned, that's an organization that exists to go in and look at any event that occurs anywhere in the country that involves a chemical explosion. And so they may be looking at things broader than where we have jurisdiction and responsibility. They are not a regulator, so it's not their role to issue any penalties or sanctions. It's their job to look very big picture. What occurred? Why did it occur? Are there changes that should be made in industry standards? Are there changes that they would recommend for state or federal regulators?
What's your sense of how well the teams are working at this point and what that conversation has been? I mean, that federal agency was actually up for having its budget zeroed out. I think that's been averted now, and my understanding is that they are responding and planning to investigate what happened. But what's it look like just on the ground in terms of these teams?
So we're on the ground, and we absolutely want to, where we can, we certainly want to be coordinating and talking to each other and talking about the things that we're learning, and where it's appropriate, sharing information. It's important to note that they are separate, independent investigations that are each going to be done on their own timeframes. But where it makes sense to coordinate, we're striving really hard to coordinate.
I imagine, just like with an airplane accident, it's early days yet. It's probably too early to speculate about the cause of this accident or tragedy?
Yeah, we're there. We're doing a thorough investigation. We want to figure out what happened, why it happened. It's too soon today to be able to have those conversations.
Can you give us a sense of whether this particular paper and pulp mill was on L&I's radar? I understand, based on some reporting by King 5 in the Seattle Times, that there was a previous incident that they termed a near miss. And there was also a fire that had burned there for several days, even prior to that. What did you guys know about, or what concerns did you have prior to this happening?
So at the time of the incident, we did have 2 inspections open, not at all related to the tank in question. And both of those were as a result of worker complaints. A majority of the work that we do on the safety and health side is going to come from things like worker complaints or someone referring a specific incident to us. And so when those things come up, we'll show up on site. We'll say, here's the nature of the specific complaint or issue that came up, and sort of delve into those specific questions and issues.
Do you know when the last time your folks had actually inspected that facility as a matter of course? I understand you inspect like 1,500 workplaces a year at least.
So we're going to do about, give or take, about 5,000 inspections across the state. And
I was off by almost a factor of 5, so 5,000 a year on typical
and
year.
so as I had mentioned, we had been there on those two specific complaints, very different than the tragic incident that occurred. And then over the past number of years, we've been there a few times, again, based upon specific complaints that have come in.
What about just a general inspection that's not triggered by a complaint?
So we do some of those. The way we prioritize our resources is, first and foremost, we're going to go where there was somebody who was hurt on the job, or unfortunately in an incident like this where there was a fatality. Our next tier is when we get complaints or we get referrals where someone says this is something very specific that is a concern. We'll go and try to figure out, is there an issue? Is there a violation of worker safety code? And then we also do surprise inspections. And there what we do is we identify industries that historically present workplace hazards. So what you'll see is we have a very robust presence in places like construction or places like agriculture.
So at this point, is there any sense that there were, as you know, there was those 2 open inspections? How would you characterize this particular plant's sort of visibility within your agent? Were they on a watch list? Were they a plant of concern? How would you characterize or categorize their status prior to this event?
So I think that pulp and paper mills overall, there's a lot of risk in those facilities. And so we're always aware that there's risk connected to that work, which is why, from our perspective, and I think when you look at sort of the underlying premise of workplace safety and health, it becomes so important for an employer, whether they're in the pulp and paper mill industry or they're in construction, to really actively focus on what they do each and every day to keep their workplace safe.
In the wake of this, is there an opportunity, or have you ordered additional inspections of similar paper pulp mills in the state?
So it certainly has raised everyone's awareness, and we are absolutely expecting that whether you're a pulp and paper mill or another manufacturer, that this is an important reminder that each and every day employers need to be thinking about what can be hurting my workers, the people that come to work every day and they want to go home to their families, and that they need to be actively engaging things like their safety committees. Washington is a great state because one of our rules basically says that every workplace should have a safety committee where you bring together management and you bring together frontline workers to talk about what could hurt our workforce and what are we going to do about it.
Has any sort of formal notification gone out to those types of businesses in the state, or have you been able to step up and get eyes on other similar facilities at this point?
We are available to provide, if asked, consultative services where we would show up for free and do a non-enforcement inspection. And we're also, I think this event is raising everybody's awareness to be thinking about what are some of those hazards on dangerous sites across the state.
What would you say just about we've been in pretty tight budget times, and that's affected agencies. I know the way that your agency is funded is a little bit different, but do you feel like L&I has the adequate inspection staff to do the work day in and day out in a state that's growing and where there is sort of very complex nature of different kinds of employers and business sites? What's your sort of level of comfort with the number of inspectors you have?
So per capita, if you compare Washington to any other state in the country, we have a greater presence than anyone else. That's the good news. The challenge is, I can honestly say it's never going to be enough. We can never be everywhere all the time, which again is why it's so important for employers across the state to recognize their responsibility to be thinking about what they need to be doing each and every day to maintain a safe workplace.
Do you, at this point, anticipate, again, it's early days, but can you imagine policies changing, laws changing as a result of something of this magnitude?
I think all of those things should be on the table. Again, it's too soon to say the what, but I think we all need to be committed to thinking about what can be the lessons learned and what is it that we can be doing as a state, what is it that the industry can be doing, what is it that the legislature can be doing to be thinking about how to prevent something this tragic from ever happening again.
I know over the years, one of the questions that's come up is whether fines are keeping up with inflation, essentially. What's your sense or feeling about the adequacy of the fines that are available to your agency?
So when we do issue monetary penalties, they are absolutely important. I want to emphasize that what's even more important is that employers fix what we find. And so where we need to start is if there's a violation of safety and health code, get it fixed, because that's what's going to prevent a future injury. In terms of our fines themselves, we have changed statutes, so they do increase with inflation.
Just sticking with workplace safety, but stepping back a little bit, I gave some examples based on the recent Worker Memorial Day. What are the general trend lines in this state when it comes to worker safety, and both on-the-job injuries and in particular on-the-job fatalities? If we were to just look, say, at a 10-year or I don't know, maybe 20-year timeline, what would we be seeing? What would those charts look like? And I know we're a growing state.
The good news would be when you compare the fatality rate in Washington state to the national average, we're below the national average. Fewer fatalities than other places in the country. That's the good news. The challenge is one is too many. And that I believe that workplace fatalities are by their nature preventable. And so that continued emphasis on what is it that can be done to ensure that every worker who shows up to work at the beginning of the day gets to go home to their family at the end needs to be our paramount concern.
Do you think workplaces are getting safer or more dangerous?
I think with the advent of some safety technology, there is absolutely the potential for workplaces to get safer. What's necessary is that in every workplace, there's that emphasis on a culture of safety. That when you think about what we do as a company, how do you make sure that safety is as important as getting things done on time, getting things done on budget, getting things done in a quality way? And those organizations that put safety up there as equally, or if not more important, I think really lead the way and wind up, I think, being more profitable and more effective and more productive than those that don't.
I should note, just as a data point, that L&I takes in about 100,000 new injury claims every year and pays out more than $2 billion in payments, not always directly related to each of those new claims because there's ongoing claims from previous years, but just to get a sense of the context of what we're talking about here. On balance, when you think about the safety side of this agency, enforcing those laws, inspecting those work sites, trying to keep injuries and deaths at a minimum, if not eventually zero. And you've been in this position since 2013?
2013,
yeah,
yes.
So more than a decade. And you think about, the COVID disruption. But as we sit here in 2026, at least compared to the tenure you've had, how would you sort of sum up where we stand?
I think that we have a state where, for the most part, we have employers that are committed to workplace safety. I think we have an active worker advocacy community that is absolutely committed to workplace safety. You combine those two, and I think that puts us in better stead than most other places. Now, again, can we do better? Absolutely. Are there new and emerging hazards that we need to be thinking about? Absolutely. So we consistently at the agency are looking at what are the challenges that we may not be effectively regulating today that we want to be regulating tomorrow. So over these last few years, we've looked at things like, do we need to update our rule around working outdoors in the heat? We've looked at what about wildfires. We're getting ready to engage with the business community and the worker advocacy community to be looking at indoor heat, because the more that we can be looking at the hazards of today, the potential hazards of tomorrow, laying that foundation with safety rules, regulations, follow that by outreach, consultation, and enforcement. That's how we ensure that we're going to be even safer tomorrow than we are today.
And just one last question to bring this full circle. With regards to the investigation into the Longview Nippon Dino Wave disaster, what is the timeline for completing the investigation, and when might there be public findings?
So statutorily, when we open up a fatality investigation, we have 6 months, 180 days, which takes you to mid to late November. I anticipate in this case, because of the complexity of what we're looking at, making sure that we're thorough, making sure that we're thoughtful, being able to get answers for the community and for families, will probably take close to those 6 months.
Okay. The other sort of big book of business is operating the workers' compensation system. I mentioned some of the numbers, but let's start with the cost to business. They pay rates just like you would to an insurance company. Those rates went up on average about 5% in I guess that was for 2026. The agency cited rising medical expenses, wage replacement costs, disability obligations. Of course, the increase highlights sort of continuing tension between maintaining benefits and controlling employer costs. What is the reasoning for this increase? What's your message to the employer community about that level of increase?
Well, Austin, first, I do want to point out a uniqueness of Washington State, that in Washington State, we're the only place where workers make a significant contribution to the premium payment. So on average, when you look at a dollar that we collect, about 25% of that comes from workers themselves. In terms of rates overall, we are looking to ensure that we're bringing in enough money to be able to cover costs. And inflation's happening. We do recognize that as wages go up, the amount that we would pay to a worker who's hurt on the job is going to increase. We want to make sure that we continue to pay adequately for medical providers across the state to continue to treat injured workers. So what my commitment to the business community and to workers who pay premiums is that we will focus on steady and predictable changes in rates. I don't want to be in a place where we dramatically drop rates one year, dramatically increase them another year. We've created some benchmarks so they could sort of see how are we doing against typical inflation. we're also focusing on what can we be doing within our organization in partnership with employers, in partnership with workers, to get better outcomes for workers. The more we can focus on working with somebody who's unfortunately hurt on the job to help them heal and return to work, better outcome for them, they wind up being better in their lifetime, and it reduces cost.
When I looked at the historic rates, it looked like since 2019, rates have been increasing a bit. There was, I think, a dip in 2025. Before that, rates were trending below wage inflation, which is the agency's benchmark. What would you say has been the trend line, and help put this most recent increase in some context?
So over the last few years, we certainly have seen increases in costs, and I think there are a few things that contribute to that. When we look at long-term disability, or for those individuals who are hurt on the job and out for more than a year, that's been ticking up in the last few years. I think since COVID, we've also, on the workers' comp side, but also in general, I think access to medical has been an ongoing challenge. If you think about how hard it is today to be able to get in and see a doctor, think about what it was like 10 years ago. We face that problem individually, and I think folks in the workers' comp system are facing something similar.
Is there, in terms of, and I do want to come back to these longer-term disabilities, but is there, you mentioned access to medical care, is there something else that might explain what's driving that particular trend line? Long-term disability?
We really are digging in and continuing to look at what are the things that result in somebody being out of work. Now, at first, we want to focus on the medical. We want to focus on ensuring that individuals who are hurt get access to the best medical care possible, and so that they can focus themselves on healing and returning to work. We also then want to be looking at what other things can we be doing with employers, encouraging employers to interact with their staff. The more that you feel that you're working for someone who wants you back, the easier it is to be able to come back if it's medically appropriate.
I know that the business community feels like they're kind of getting hammered on all sides, and this is one more, line item, one more bill that's getting more expensive, and they're looking for some relief. One of the questions that's been asked is, okay, what is the state? If somebody's on L&I and getting workers' compensation benefits, are they also still getting paid family leave? Are they also getting other benefits? What are the rules about that? Is anybody looking at, what is a fair matrix, both for the injured worker but also for the employer?
Right. So in the example that you gave, the answer would be no. So for instance, if you are on workers' compensation and receiving benefits from us, you would not also receive unemployment insurance, because the two, by definition, should not be occurring at the same time.
And do we know that that's not occurring? Is there adequate oversight and sort of systems to detect that?
We will work very closely with employment security to do cross matches and to try to ensure that those things are not occurring.
Do you have a sense of how often it is happening?
I think,
or slipping through the cracks?
I think it would be extraordinarily rare. Can I tell you it would never happen? No, but I think what we're also doing is ensuring that we have a robust investigations program. So the concern, we would not want to be in a space where you have someone who is receiving benefits from us, where a doctor has said you can't work, and they're working 3 jobs under the table, not reporting to us, not reporting to employment security. I think that's rare, but we want to have a robust system to be able to look at that, as well as looking at the employer side, finding those employers who are knowingly and willfully not choosing to pay their premiums, because that hurts the honest employer.
Well, so just going back to sort of this business climate and the cost to doing business in the state, you sit in the governor's cabinet, obviously. Is there a bigger conversation happening about the sort of rising costs and what it means for employers? And while you may need to impose higher rates to keep this system solvent, there is an impact, and it's, as I said, it's one of many impacts.
I'm confident in saying that this governor, this cabinet, is actively looking at how do we make things better for all Washingtonians, whether it's workers, whether it's citizens, whether it's businesses, really looking at the experience that people have with government and saying, how can we make it better? If you look at some of the governor's executive orders on things like customer experience, that's just one example of trying to put ourselves as government officials in the shoes of the people that we serve, and and asking ourselves, what would it be like if we're them? Where does it work? Where does it not work? And where it's not working, let's do something about it.
We'll circle back to some of this in our second half, but let me ask you also just about the last legislative session. A number of bills passed that directly affect L&I. We aren't going to get to all of them, but one of them had to do with, it's sort of technical in nature, but I'm interested in its impacts. It has to do with modernizing how you communicate, and I guess allowing the agency to do more electronic rather than, it's like the credit card companies, right? These days they want you to go to auto pay and electronic billing. What does this new law allow you to do in terms of how you communicate with the employer community?
Well, Austin, where this started is that we were doing some work within the agency trying to be more efficient, looking at where are there opportunities for cost savings. And there are lots of places where we send out mail. And we were asking ourselves, do you have to send out the mail? Can we do things electronically? And as we begin to dig in, what we realized is time and again, the law said you must send something via the mail. And much of that made sense historically when there wasn't an internet. Yeah. And so what we decided to do was to run a bill that would allow us to use electronic communication as long as our customers, whether they're businesses or workers could still choose to opt in to receive mail in the traditional way. So now that barrier is removed, we're putting that team back together and asking them to look at where are those places where we might want to switch over. Or there are places today that because of the law, we were already communicating electronically, but also sending mail. So now we're going to look at, well, maybe rather than communicating twice, just communicate once, because our customers are saying electronic makes sense to us. That's what we need.
Do you recall or know what kind of potential savings a change like this could mean?
It's hard to say now, because what we would have to do sort of an assessment on a case-by-case basis, and there may be times where we need to do an upfront investment. So where we don't have electronic communication, we might have to spend a little bit of money, but then over time, if you just think about the volume of mail that an agency like ours puts out the door, over time, I think it can be significant.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to ask you about Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights, which was also another bill that passed this year. When we return, we continue our conversation with Joel Sachs of the Department of Labor and Industries. We'll be back right after this.
A vote in Olympia, a change in your community. On TVW's Field Report, Angela Nalesko tracks how state policies become real-world changes across Washington. Field Report, Saturday and Sunday mornings, 7:30, and online at tvw.org.
Welcome back to Inside Olympia. Our focus this week is worker safety and Washington's workers' compensation system. Joining me once again is the Director of Washington's Department of Labor and Industries, Joel Sachs. And we're talking about the legislative session, some of the bills that passed this year. Another one that was quite a significant policy change has to do with giving domestic workers some rights. And these would be people who are typically working in homes. I guess it would be nannies, house cleaners, and others who are oftentimes working outside of the traditional protections that a more typical worker might experience in the workplace. So what is the Domestic Workers Bill? What's the significance of this law?
What this does is it takes the group of workers that you were just describing, Austin, and says, regardless of who's paying your check, you're entitled to some basic rights if you're working in the state of Washington. You're entitled to a minimum wage. You're entitled to overtime. You're entitled to know your rights as a worker. You're entitled to protections from retaliation for raising your hand and sort of saying, hey, I think I'm not being treated in a manner that gives me access to things like minimum wage. And so what this bill will basically do is create those rights for the domestic workers. We then have the responsibility over this next year of doing some rulemaking to help implement it.
Well, I know that advocates said that this was important because oftentimes these are workers who are marginalized, don't speak English as a first language, might have sort of other disadvantages to asserting their rights under the law, and also maybe are especially vulnerable to being abused. But it's a very different equation when you are talking about regulating what's happening, say, in somebody's home versus what's happening at a traditional workplace. How do you envision this playing out in sort of practice? And what role will your agency have in enforcing this? Because again, in the traditional sense, you're sending people in to investigate a workplace based on a complaint, for instance. Will you go into somebody's house?
Right. Yeah, we're going to have a couple of roles. The first thing we're going to be doing is working with the folks that we're advocating for this bill, as well as those impacted by it, to put out some rules to sort of take what the legislature passed and provide a little bit more clarity. We will also be doing outreach, helping to educate both these workers about what their rights are, as well as those who are paying their wages, to ensure that they understand their responsibilities. If we get complaints, we would investigate. I wouldn't anticipate us going out into people's homes, but what we'll probably be doing is reaching out through letters and phone calls and saying, hey, we got a complaint, help us understand what's happening from your perspective. Can you give us some more information? And in those cases where there are abuses, we want to be there to be able to protect those workers and make them whole.
What is the timeline for getting those rules in place and having this sort of up and running?
Over the course of the next year. I would envision the law really takes effect in July of 27.
Let me ask you about one other bill that passed, which created a wage recovery fund for, as I understand it, this is in cases where people have experienced or been victimized by wage theft. How does this fund work, and what makes this significant?
So this is something that came out of a work group that was created, made up of business and labor. And they got together and looked at where are there areas where we can make improvements to protect workers, provide clarity for businesses. The bill did a whole variety of things. One of the things that it did is create a new fund where we take the penalties that we currently collect from employers that we find who have violated wage and hour laws, put it into a separate fund, and then use that fund to be able to provide support for those workers who are owed money from their employer. So in today's world, we do an investigation, we determine that you were owed money, we then tell the employer you have to pay. And if the employer doesn't pay, the worker is still out of luck. So what this will do is enable the worker to get somewhere around $2,500 to be able to start putting food on the table. We will then focus on collecting from the employer and replenishing the fund.
And when might this fund be up and running, and when would this sort of benefit start being available?
That one is going to be a few years out. So probably we're looking at 2028 before the fund is going to be available. There's a series of things we need to do. The bill also did some things that take effect in the near term.
But again, the idea is make the person who was deprived of their earned wages whole, and then you guys go after the employer who wasn't fulfilling their obligation.
Not necessarily whole, because it could be much more than the $2,500 I was describing, but at least give them something so that they can put food on the table for themselves and their family.
Got it. There were also some pregnancy accommodations that were approved by lawmakers. Can you walk us through sort of what those changes are and kind of, again, what the need that was identified was?
Yeah, that was something that this year was more of a refinement of some law that had passed in prior years. So for years there have been protections to ensure an individual who is pregnant gets accommodations in the workplace. Over the past couple of years, the legislature's made some changes, expanded the universe of employers that are going to be responsible for complying with the law, and then sort of switched roles a little bit. So currently it's being enforced by the Attorney General's office. As they expanded the responsibility to all employers, they also transitioned the enforcement responsibility to labor and industries. And then this year it was more of a cleanup bill where there were a couple of small technical changes that needed to be improved.
And just lastly on this front, the governor recently issued an executive order on menopause and women in the workforce, and requiring employers to kind of accommodate or be aware of needs that come about from women going through menopause. Is that something that L&I is going to have a direct role in helping to enforce or educate employers about?
That executive order is for public entity, for government, for the executive branch. So we will have a role in ensuring that as an employer, we're doing the right
So
thing
it's
by our
specific
staff.
and limited to public agencies.
Right.
And L&I will help with the notification.
We will
and
make sure that
education about that.
we will make sure that we do the right thing as an employer.
Oh, as an employer for your own
Yeah,
agency. Got it,
exactly.
got it.
And hopefully that it'll be a place where government goes first. We learn valuable lessons and can look at eventually what does that mean for other workplaces across the state.
About a year ago, August of last year, there was a story in the Seattle Times about a major technology upgrade at L&I that WATEC, which is, I guess, our state's IT department, had basically put on hold. It was a nearly $300 million project. Some of money, I think it was about $30 million, had been spent, and this project did not seem to be getting liftoff. Let's start. We'll kind of work backwards. What is the status now? Is that still on hold? Is there a plan to restart? Where do things stand today?
So we have restarted.
You have restarted.
And we're doing it in close partnership and collaboration with WATEC. We're actually trying to model a different approach toward implementing these large IT projects.
So do you have a new third-party contractor you're working with? What are the sort of circumstances of the restart?
So a couple of the changes in terms of roles and responsibilities. WATEC is managing the day-to-day project. We've actually worked together to hire a new project director, someone that comes with a vast amount of experience both in workers' comp and in technology transformations. So they will be focusing and running the project day to day.
And are they under WATEC at this point?
Under WATEC.
Okay.
And
that's a difference from how this was being done before?
Exactly. And it's a difference from the way many IT projects are done, but I think that this presents a real interesting opportunity for the state to think about a creative, innovative way to implement big IT projects, where an agency like ours will be focusing on the business, looking at things from a workers' comp perspective, what do we need to do, and then leaning on the knowledge and expertise of WATEC to help us execute and implement.
And this IT modernization, is it your claims
Yes.
system?
Yes.
That's being, and help us understand sort of the significance or scope of a project like this.
So start with some of the things we were talking about earlier, that we are in the business of processing 90 to 100,000 claims a year, supporting 200,000 businesses, close to 3 million workers across the state. And the technology system that we're using is still one that was built in the 1980s. And the reality is we've made a whole series of changes over the years, and it's about 150 different systems that are pieced together. When you look at our ability to help injured workers heal and return to work, we spend way too much time with our staff trying to manage the inefficiencies of the system. What we know is the most important thing that a claims adjudicator can do is spend time talking to an injured worker, spend time talking to an employer, not managing an antiquated IT system. And so what we're looking to do through these changes is utilize the technology that exists today, make the job of the claims manager easier in terms of some of the day-to-day tasks, and then empower them to spend more time talking to our customers.
What is the promise of this modernization once it's done? How would it make it easier and more time efficient for the claims folks?
What it will do is free them up from doing tasks that aren't necessarily the best use of their time. So, for instance, now we have claims managers looking at green screens, if you will, having to navigate their way through hundreds of pages of image documents to find those two pieces of information from a doctor that they need in order to process a claim. It takes an incredible amount of time. Imagine a system now where the technology system will make it easier for them to be able to find it right away. A technology system that will help them identify, hey, here's a piece of mail that came in today that if you respond today, it'll have a huge impact on an injured worker and their course of treatment, rather than something that just sort of sits in the queue for 12, 24 days.
Let's do a little Monday morning quarterbacking on this project. It did go on for about 10 years. Critics, and again, this is reporting by the Seattle Times last August, blamed that lack of progress in part on L&I's indecisive management, sagging morale, unusually high turnover. Representative Travis Couture said that we've been in this boondoggle for years and years, spending tens of millions of dollars and landing absolutely nowhere. He said if this was the private sector, I would have been fired 10 times over by now. How do you explain and address what happened previously with this project?
Yeah, thanks, Austin. Good questions. There's always lessons learned. There's always an opportunity to do better tomorrow. As I reflect back on it, one of the things that was critical to us from the beginning is to recognize the complexity of the existing system. What we knew then, what we know now, is that we can't fail, that we have to plan on exactly what we want to do, how we want to do it, and recognize that as we're modernizing the system, we still have to pay out benefits to 90,000 people a year. We still have to collect the premiums. And so we were spending the time making sure that we understood the system that had been built up over 20 to 30 years, trying to build out a plan to think about the best way to be able to move forward. And there were times where the old expression, measure twice, cut once, we were measuring 2 or 3 times because we didn't want to get it wrong.
So as I noted, $30 million was spent. It was a roughly $292 million project. What is the anticipated cost now and timeline for 2.0?
So the team that we've hired to run the project has just updated what we call the technology budget, sort of looking at what is the projected spend for the overall project. Total cost stays about the same. So just under $300 million, so that hasn't increased. And overall, what we've identified is a series of things that we're going to do over the next 6 years to make it happen. One of the critical things in the roadmap that we have about how we move forward is we want to do it in an incremental way, rather than sort of taking one big bang and change everything all at once. We're looking at what can we do first that can have a meaningful impact for workers and employers and our staff, and then how can we follow that up where we do something second, third, and fourth. So we're going to have a series of concrete, tangible wins over these next 6 years.
And why should the public, why should the taxpayers, why should the customers and clients of this agency have confidence given the past experience on this particular project?
Fair question. And for me, I start with the necessity. Status quo is unacceptable. And I think anyone that sees our system, anyone who understands the constraints of the system, recognizes we have to modernize the technology systems. Second, I think the team that we've put in place is going to be the right team, and the partnership that we have with WATEC and others, I think, set us up for success.
I want to come back around to, and this is sort of a step back, but I think it's still on theme with this, which is sort of a broader criticism you often hear of L&I around costs and inefficiencies. This is a publicly operated insurance company, as I noted. There are private versions of this. We do it in the state with a public agency. Let me just walk you through some of the trend lines that I have seen. You can correct me if any of this is wrong, and maybe help explain what's going on. You mentioned earlier long-term disability claims, and then pension claims, which I understand are sort of permanent disability, are the claims that drive a large percentage of L&I's costs. And as I understand it, they are rapidly increasing. In fact, I saw, I think, one statistic that showed they're up 17% in the last few years. I don't know if you have a different or better number than that. But let's go back to sort of what's happening there, given that that's such a cost driver. And from what I'm hearing, it's setting off some red flags for folks.
Well, first, what I would want to do is when you look at the pension rates and the number of pensions that occur today, compare it to 15 years ago, it's lower, not higher. Second, I think that we are absolutely committed to thinking about where are there places that we can innovate. And what we recognize is that the more that we can be working with injured workers and employers early on in a claim, that's the best way to prevent long-term disability. The more that we can be empowering workers to, one, get access to first-rate medical treatment, and then second, not have concern about where's my wage replacement going to be coming from as I focus on healing, that helps. Third is, how do we work with employers to help them identify the role that they can play in encouraging workers, when medically appropriate, to be able to return to work. Fourth, there was a law that we worked with the legislature to change back in 2024 to allow us to provide earlier training to a subset of workers who want trainings. Think about someone for whom English may be their second language or really hasn't been exposed to some technology today. So if I'm not going to be able to return to my job of injury, if I'm not going to be able to be a roofer again, we now have the ability for workers that are interested and motivated to be able to get some training quicker. And I think the quicker you get access to those things, the more likely you are to be able to land that next job.
I remember a few years back, several years ago, debates about the pension claims, and if they were approved, whether the individual worker got a lump sum or payments over a period of time. Remind us of that sort of conversation, debate, and where things stand on how that's approached.
So for someone that's not going to be able to return to their job of injury, there are a couple of different avenues under the law. And the one that you were describing was something that at the time was called a structured settlement, which would have been a one-time lump sum payment that a worker could choose to take, which would then enable them to leave the system, which is different than the pension, which would be sort of an ongoing payment. That exists, and for some workers, it works out really well. For other workers, it's not an option that they choose to exercise. There are a couple of other similar programs that exist, and we're always willing to sit down and work with the business community, to work with the worker advocates, to ask ourselves for those individuals that are injured on the job, can't return to their job of injury, need some sort of retraining. Is the system working as effectively as it could? And I'm committed to continuing to ask that question. Where are those places where we can come up with other options for workers to choose that may give them the best options to help them heal and return to some kind of employment? So we want to provide as many options as possible. Some exist today. In the future, I think in partnership with the business community and the worker advocacy community, there could be others.
You said sort of over a longer period of time, the trend line has been coming down for these, is for both long-term disability and pension, or just specifically pension?
In both, if you compare the numbers today to the numbers 15 years ago, they're lower. The last few years, post-COVID, we've certainly seen on long-term disability an uptick.
Given that post-COVID, do you have any sense of whether you're reaching a crest point? Do you have any projections on where this goes from here? Is there sort of a marshaling of an effort to try to, I mean, you mentioned access to care could be one issue, but like what's happening kind of internally to try to get your arms around what is going on here and see if you can bend the curve back the other way? Because I think people would argue it's not great for the workers or for the system,
Absolutely.
Right?
So I believe that there's three paths that we need to be looking at. We need to be looking at people, we need to be looking at processes, and we need to be looking at technology. So we've talked about the technology avenue, which is another reason why this technology project is so important. On the people side, we need to be in a space where our claims managers have an appropriate number of claims that they manage. Today, they're managing over 200 claims per claims manager. Industry average is 141. So this past year, as part of this last legislative session, the legislature gave us permission to hire claims managers so that we can bring down that claims load. I think that's going to have a dramatic difference because that will enable our claims managers to respond more quickly to individual cases, to spend more time with individual workers early on. And then the third piece is looking at process. Where are those places where the process today serves workers efficiently? Great, we should celebrate that. Where is it that it doesn't serve workers effectively today? Let's make improvements, let's make enhancements. So that one example that I gave you about early on training was one attempt to do that. We need to continue to look at what others could be.
You teed up one of the questions I had, which is, so the legislature's given you the authority to hire more claims managers, or claims managers. As I understand it, though, it takes about 2 years to train these individuals up, that your classes have had about a 50% attrition rate. How will you succeed at this, having enough people to then bring down those caseloads to the 141 you're targeting?
That's the goal. So we're going to do a couple of things. One is, I think as our staff recognizes that relief is on the way, that their claims loads will go down, I think that's going to be a huge morale increaser. We are looking now at how can we increase the number of classes that we have at any given time. But we also need to make sure that we're doing this in a thoughtful way. What we don't want to do is hire a bunch of people, have huge classes, and tell them, now it's your job to work with these injured workers who are in desperate need of the state support, and not adequately train them. So it's going to take time. We don't want to grow too quickly because that will not help workers. But we're gonna focus on each and every day thinking about what are the things that we can do to bring folks into the organization. And equally important, Austin, is to think about what can we do to retain staff. Because once we train people, we want people each and every day to wake up and say, L&I is a place I want to work.
I do want to know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, that the 141 claims per claims manager, that was actually recommended more than a decade ago.
Yes.
And we still aren't there yet.
Yes.
Which I think kind of goes to that pessimism about can L&I change and modernize and do what it's promising to do.
Absolutely. It was something that has been on the radar scope. What I'm so optimistic about is that there was a fundamental change in the law this year. So historically, traditionally, it would be each year the department would say, do we get permission from the legislature to bring on another 10 claims managers?
So now you have carte blanche to do it.
We have the ability to hire without having to go through that formal legislative process, but there's built-in accountability. So we have to be working with our advisory committee. We have to be producing reports. We have to demonstrate that as we hire more people, as claims loads go down, that we get better outcomes for workers.
Let's also, I want to ask you just a general question about costs versus revenues. This is an insurance company. Let's think of it as that. As I understand it, if you look at recent fiscal years, there have been billions of dollars in cost increases. The amount that the L&I has collected has been eclipsed by the amount of money going out the door in terms of premiums. So the numbers I have in front of me is L&I reported collecting just over $2 billion in premiums and had about that much in incurred expenses in 2024. In 2025, premiums went up to $2.5 billion, but the agency reported $3.6 billion in incurred expenses, an increase of $1.5 billion. That seems like, if you're just looking at a balance sheet, a problematic trend line.
Well, there are a couple of things there. The one is there is some one-time issues there in terms of our projected liabilities. It's not necessarily always dollars that go out the door as much as it is actuarial assumptions of dollars that will go out the door in the future. The second thing that I want to share is that we have been focusing on ensuring that we have adequate funds in our system. So go back again 15 years, and for every dollar of liability, we maybe had $1.10 or less invested. Today, that's closer to $1.25. What that enables us to do is ensure that we are in that space where if we do have to increase rates because costs are going up, we can do it in a slow, methodical, thoughtful way. If we were where we were 15, 20 years ago, we'd be seeing dramatic increases in workers' comp premiums. And that unpredictability is the one thing we've heard loud and clear from the business community that they just don't want because they want to be able to plan year over year.
But that sort of gap between premiums and expenses, I mean, to somebody outside the agency, you could look at that and say, that looks like a 3-alarm fire situation. That looks like we could be headed for insolvency. It looks like if it was a private insurance company, the Office of Insurance Commissioner might be coming in and doing some enforcement and saying, you're not charging enough to cover your expenses. Something's wrong here.
Yeah, and when you pull back and sort of look holistically, we are charging an adequate amount in part because we have the reserves. We have the reserves for this specific reason. We are also continuing to look at where are those places where we can be making changes that could impact some of those liability numbers. So there are years where we see the future liabilities increase. There are also years where we see the projected liabilities go down. So if you look at the long-term trend line, look at the last 10 to 12 years, the overall on-the-books liabilities have actually gone, as a result of the projected claims costs, have actually gone down. In terms of the year-to-year, month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter actuarial assumptions.
I know there's terms, and we won't get into all these details, but loss ratio, operating ratio, when I looked at the numbers again, they were well over 100%, which I guess is not where you want to be. Are you again saying that this is sort of a temporary state of affairs?
What I would look at is if you look at the 10-year trend, it's right around that 100% mark. And what that represents is for every dollar that we collect, what are the projected costs? And again, what's important, and again, I don't want to get overly wonky, but a lot of what goes into this are not dollars that are going out the door today, but it's projected dollars that are going to be going out the door tomorrow. So we still have the ability by thinking about being more efficient, by having a better technology system, by hiring more claims managers, we can impact those long-term projections.
In less than a minute, if some of the issues we're talking about have been bedeviling this agency for a decade or more, whether that's modernization of technology or trying to get your claims management ratios down so you've got fewer managers working fewer cases, what can you say? I won't ask you to promise, but what can you say briefly about what you think you can deliver in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
So I believe that we're better today than we were a decade ago. I think over the next 3 to 5 years, as we continue to increase the number of staff that we have, as we begin to see the technology project come to fruition, as we continue to work with our legislative partners to make reforms, what we will see is that injured workers who are unfortunately hurt on the job having a better experience with us, they're going to be able to heal and return to work sooner in even more effective jobs so that they can be taking care of themselves and their families.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. Joel Sachs, the Director of the State Department of Labor and Industries, thanks for coming in for the conversation. Thank you for watching Inside Olympia. We'll see you again next week.